might share a definition of intersectionality that actually is comes from my old friend from back in the day in Washington, D.C. Her name is Dr. Lisa Boleg, and she is a professor at George Washington University and a leading expert on intersectionality. And she has a wonderful definition here. First of all, she points out that this term is really grounded in Black feminist history. And certainly in the US and elsewhere, we know about the historical oppression of women of color because of the two marginalized identities that they carry, gender and race. And of course, this involves other groups as well. So when you think of intersectionality, the intersection of these various identities. She goes on to say, intersectionality is foremost about paying attention to power. Who has it? Who doesn't have it? And that really hit home with me because of my work studying politics. So this is the personal meets the political, if you will. And so intersectionality, she said, if intersectionality, if you're not paying attention to where there is interlocking oppression and discrimination, then you're not doing the work of intersectionality. So I think that's a really terrific sort of small definition. Are you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yay!
Yay!
Thank you. The floor is yours, Sherman.
Thank you so much. And it's like Crystal's reading from my brain, because a lot of the concepts, even they're expressed in a lot of different ways, but we'll touch on some of that. So it'll flow right into what you were just talking about. First, I want to say I would start with Konbanwa, but I'm in Virginia and you all are in Japan, so it's not going to be appropriate. Instead, I should be saying Ohayou gozaimasu, right? My name is Sherman Gillums Jr. My pronouns are he and him. My privileges are my male gender, my heterosexual orientation, my American nationality, English as my first language, my upper middle class status, my advanced education, my marriage status, and my Christian religion. My prejudices, the ones that I am likely to face, are due to my African American ethnicity, my physical disability and history of mental illness as a military veteran who lives with post-traumatic stress, anxiety, and depression following injury during my service. Now, what did I just do for you all? What I've done is list for you my intersections. Some you can see, but some you can't. Now, why does this matter? I'll say it matters because we live in a world of complex, overlapping, interlocking, and often competing intersections where privilege and power has us moving through multiple sites of identity. And you can see some of them represented in the wheel. Now, if I came to you in need of help, you might be in a better position to assist me in a crisis because you'll have a better understanding of who you're helping. However, it's a luxury that few of us enjoy in the work that we do. So having an intersectionality informed mindset is the best starting point for those of us who choose paths that involve helping people in crisis or at the lowest points in their lives. And for some people, image management within these intersections is kind of a hobby. We all know people who post their lives on social media and they get to be whoever they want to portray themselves as, living the good life, whether it's true or not. They can put out there what they want people to see. But for other people, image management is a survival skill, like code switching at work or at school to avoid stereotype threat where people have to deny aspects of their self-identity in order to fit in out of a fear that they will be unfairly stigmatized. So learning how to identify and connect with all these intersections can never really be a destiny. It's an ongoing process where we aspire to do better. And the more we engage different types of people where they are, not necessarily where we are comfortable meeting them, the better we'll get. Now, to make matters even more complicated, mental illness does not care who you are. It doesn't care what you look like or where you're from. If you have a brain and a pulse, you can also incur schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, phobias, eating disorders, all those things. Unfortunately, the society we live in does care. and we'll typically decide the value of certain people within the social order based on identity. However, this does not show up until people become data points on a trend line that tells a story. They become statistics. So I'll give you a couple of data points to think about. If you happen to be sitting near 4 other people right now, one of you is statistically likely to have a mental illness. If you're among 20 people right now, one of you is likely to have a serious mental illness as measured by the impact on your self-care, relationships, employability, and other aspects of a routine life. Next slide, please. Now, not yet, don't click yet. Now, wherever I go, I happen to be that person in the group of 5 or even 20, depending on what's going on in my life. So, but it's really obvious to the people around me. So you can't look at somebody and tell what's going on with their lives in terms of mental illness, but that's what makes suicide, addiction, and homelessness so hard to confront. Now let's click. Now I want to make it plain for you. We often want to see people like a Rubik's Cube, and I hope everybody watching this is old enough to remember the Rubik's Cube. I kind of use it as a metaphor to make intersectionality plain. Now, we acknowledge our complexities, yet see others through this lens of familiarity based on our experiences. We know that a Rubik's Cube is complex once the colors get all twisted, but at least we're familiar with all those colors and its shape. Next, please. Now, when problems arise, we simplify what we think we're seeing. That person is homeless because he's Black, or suicidal because she's gay, or has schizophrenia because it's a white person's disease, or drug addicted because it's a person of color. So we like to oversimplify in order to make it less complex and more familiar to us. Next, please. When in reality, that person is even more complicated than the eyes can often see. Remember what I say about this homeless Black woman who is also transgender, a military veteran with post-traumatic stress, right? Keep that image in mind. Keep in mind what you might see and assume and what might actually be happening, right? Next, please. And then add COVID-19. All those intersections, in addition to the complexities that virus presented for all of us, this case, this homeless Black woman who's also transgender, a military veteran, post-traumatic stress, just became even more complicated than we could have ever imagined. All right. So I want you to just have that in mind. Have there's no easy way to form an individual who's got all these complexities and intersections about his, her, or their lives. Now, how do we locate our resilience in all of that when we're in crisis? A lot of us assume resilience is about inner strength and character. People with tremendous stress and seemingly indomitable character, right? These people get broken all the time, and I've seen it. That didn't mean they weren't resilient. What it meant is they were asked to be strong for far too long. Now, here's my argument. One locates his, her, or their resilience in environments that foster it. Sometimes luck is involved. Sometimes it's having the right people in your life, or a good decision that paid off, like having adequate health insurance or access to therapy or medicine. But in most instances, resilience is enacted for individuals in environments that provide them the opportunity to use that inner strength they have to bounce back from crisis. Those opportunities were all too often dictated by how society bumps up against those intersections we talked about, leaving many folks to wonder, is what's happening to me because I'm me? Or is it because I'm Black? Or is it because I'm gay? Or is it because I'm homeless? And it's hard to get the true answer to that question. Next slide, please. Now, I'd like to illustrate, and I'm going to wrap up here pretty soon so we can have the others come in. I want to illustrate what resilience means for all of us as we think through these intersections by having you picture a person standing at the fulcrum of a seesaw. On one side are the negative outcomes that he or she faces, which can often implicate intersectionality. On the other side are the positive outcomes, which can often implicate privilege as an aspect of intersectionality. Now, it's worth noting that privilege doesn't always mean being white or being male, and I think Chris touched on some of that. Being heterosexual or a native English-speaking citizen also inures to the benefit of someone who may not otherwise enjoy privileges. So even privileges is multifactorial. You can't look at somebody and assume that they're privileged based on the facial identity. Next slide, please. Now, we help tip the scales by either relieving the individual of some of those problems. This can happen through financial assistance, advocacy in getting access to healthcare, safe housing, food, and other basic necessities. We also help, and this is very important, by confronting stigmas and being consistent allies, keeping social determinants of quality and life in mind as we build relationship with people who may differ from us in some way, but they also may require a greater sensitivity to what's important to them as matters of culture, right? Next slide, please. Now, in addition to lifting problems off the seesaw, we can also tilt it by adding positives. And I consider relationships the one thing you can give to just about anybody that will be a positive aspect of his, her, or their lives, depending on whether you can demonstrate respect for culture and be sensitive to those various intersections. Things like regular check-ins, things that I do with past persons where I've had to intervene with suicide intervention, engage on social media, exchange personal histories, being non-judgmental. And just being there makes all the difference in terms of strengthening those positives on the other side of the seesaw. Next slide, please. We're getting close to finishing up here. This is the most important part. The best way is to help move the fulcrum in the right direction so that people can be self-determined and empowered. This reduces the weight of those negatives on the one side and reinforces the impact of the positives on the other side. But here's an important point. Moving the fulcrum means empowering self-sufficiency through culturally responsive education. Chris touched on a little bit of that, and options that encourage self-reliance so that factors such as stereotype that or stigma don't impede someone from asking for help as that seesaw tilts in the wrong direction. The best way to empower somebody is to create the conditions where their empowerment wasn't up to somebody else. I'll say that again. We always talk about empowering people. If we create the conditions where it's not up to us to empower people because they're already fully enfranchised, they're already self-determined, that's the best position we can put folks in, full self-agency. And I think that's the ideal state for just about any individual in society with respect to their intersections. And then I guess we'll close it out by saying that COVID-19 and mental illness are two intersectional phenomena that expose the work that we still have to do in our society to root out inequities and see each other as humans first before allowing social constructs to cloud our views. And I'll end there. I'll listen in to the others and I look forward to answering questions later.
Sherman, thank you so much. That was so powerful and